Today's guest is Dr. Scott Taylor. He's the president of the Expanded Awareness Institute, the EAI, which helps people curious about near-death experiences explore what the experience means to them and to our culture as a whole. Scott's gift is the ability to make the exploration of the non-physical universe accessible to others and also their curiosity. Scott is the author and voice of 6 best-selling CDs of guided meditations on near-death experiences. In his Into the Light series, he is the spiritual teacher, speaker, and researcher on near-death experiences. Dr. Taylor is one of the few people on the planet that is an experiencer, an academic, and an educator. So let's welcome today and our inspiring guest, Dr. Scott Taylor.
Nice to be here, Adam. I've been looking forward to this.
Yes, it's very interesting as I myself have gone on my own particular journey of understanding my own mortality and the ups and downs of life. I've tried to look into my own soul's growth and try to figure out where I'm at personally, and try to have people informed with people like yourself who are inspiring through your experiences and your insight into the soul's expansion and, I guess, growing of the soul, and somewhat shedding our own exterior luggage, so to speak.
Yep, we all have some misconceptions that we need to get rid of,
Right.
in order for us to really appreciate the gifts that near-death experiencers can bring us.
Okay, and maybe you can fill us in a little bit on your path to this specific, not place, but this, I guess, this your journey itself, how you've come to this place.
Yeah, I'd love to. It took place in 1981. I was in love with a woman. Her name was Mary Frances, and she and her son Nolan, who just turned 7, had spent the day sailing on Lake Washington in southern Minnesota. Mary Fran was taking a sailing class, and Nolan was playing on the beach with the babysitter. And as they left to go home that evening, they were trying to make a left onto from a gravel road onto a county road. And as close as I can figure out, Mary Fran looked into the setting sun as she was trying to see if there were cars coming, and didn't see one. And as she pulled out, there was a horrendous collision, and it hit her right in the driver's side door, and Mary Fran was killed instantly. And her son Nolan had a mortal head wound. He didn't die right away, but he did survive for 6 days. The ambulance took both of them to Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota, and as a weird quirk of fate, Mary Fran became the first donor of Mayo's heart transplant program.
Wow.
And Nolan hung on for 6 days. Nolan was the eldest grandchild in a family of 9 kids. Mary Fran was number 3 of 9. And that winds up being important because during the intervening time between the accident and when Nolan made his transition,
Right.
those 6 days allowed this really wonderful family to come and gather in Rochester to hold support, to hold vigil for Nolan. So I mean, you can just imagine it. I mean, there's the 8 siblings, and then, mom and dad and grandpa and grandma, and uncles and aunts and cousins and
Right.
boyfriends and spouses. I mean, the place was just filled with people. And so what that meant was that we could divvy up the time to spend with Nolan. And so we had 2-hour shifts, and my shift was with Mary Fran's eldest sister, Jannie, and the 2 of us were had 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. on the 6th morning of the 6th day. And we read to him, we told him stories, we were laughing about all of the antics of all of those people in this really small waiting room. But it got to be about 5 o'clock, And Janny looked at me, and she had this concerned expression on her face, and she went to the end of the bed and picked up the charts. She was an emergency room nurse, and she was really well acquainted with trauma care. And she looked at the charts. She looked at what was going on in the, um, all of the instrumentation behind Nolan's head in the hospital room. And she just shook her head. She held out her hand to me. We grabbed chairs and we sat down by Nolan's head. And Janny said to him something on the order of, Nolan, we are so proud of you. You've been fighting really hard to be with us and to stay with us. But if your mother comes to pick you up, you can go with her.
Wow.
It's okay, because you have been this incredible brave boy, but you can be with your mother. That's okay. And then it was my turn, and I said essentially the same thing, that we had formed a really wonderful bond in the time we had gotten to know each other, and when Mary Fran came, to be with her.
Right.
And that was okay. So our shift was over, we left, and then about 45 minutes later, the nurse came in and said, all right, it's time. And we all filed into the room, and as it turns out, I was one of the last ones to be in the room. And when I got there, it was already 4 deep around the bed. So I wound up just sitting on the windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie, and we just waited. And you can watch the heart monitor go, and when it became flat, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, being by Nolan and scooping him up out of his physical body. And there was this incredible, exquisite reunion between mother and child, as only you could imagine, as the two of them reunited and got to be together. And then, completely to my surprise, they turned to me, embraced me, and then the three of us went to the light. And it was the most extraordinary thing that I have ever encountered. It was this space of profound love and acceptance, just unconditional love. It was ecstasy, it was joy, it was requited longing, it was all of those things, and so much more.
Right.
So we had a chance to be together in the light, exchange, essentially to exchange goodbyes, and to reaffirm our love for each other. And then at some point, it was just, we were done. It was okay. And Mary Fran and Nolan turned and went to the light, and I came back to my physical body. And when that happened, it wasn't the end of the story, because while I was with Mary Fran in the light, I was also fully present in the room with all of the other grieving relatives. I didn't have a word for it then. I do now. It's called bilocation,
Right.
where I had two separate consciousnesses, one with Mary Fran and Nolan saying goodbye, and the other one in the room with the relatives. And I know that to be true, because here I am sitting on this windowsill, and the inner force of this joy and love and ecstasy it was like trying to break out of me. And my facial expression was one of ecstasy and joy and being in love. And as a result, I was entirely inappropriate for what had just happened. I mean, we just lost Nolan just moments before.
Right.
And so I could do the only thing I could think of, which was to put my hands over my face to cover my face, because if somebody had looked at me, it would have been, I think, misunderstood.
Yeah.
So I was with them in the light for a while. I came back to my physical body, regained my composure, and then um, I could, be with the other grieving relatives in the room.
Was there a concept of time and space when you were in this place?
um, yes, there wasn't one. Um, that's interesting you asked that, Adam, because I really don't have a sense of how long I was in the light. Time works a whole really differently there. I would have said it was a long time, but um,
Yeah, yeah,
Earth time, I don't
yeah.
know,
But
5-10 minutes.
right, right. But being in the company of other people, had they witnessed your physical absence in
Nope,
some capacity? No.
nope.
So just you were in two different locations at the same time.
I was, yeah,
Wow, that's incredible. Was
and
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
so I didn't tell anybody for 15 years because this is 1981. I
Right,
mean, nobody knew about what we now call shared death experience.
right, right,
Hardly anybody knew about near death experiences. Raymond Moody's book had been out just 5 years and it really hadn't had a follow up. So the intensive research and writing, that would all happen in the mid to late 80s through, through today. But now there's a zillion people, but then it was a brand new concept. And I was raised in the Presbyterian church in a
right,
small
right,
town in southern Minnesota. And I really didn't have the words or the concept for what had just happened to me. And so I just kept quiet until I did.
right, right.
And yeah,
It's interesting. I interviewed Raymond Moody, and he spoke about his religious background as well. I guess suppressing his exploration of delving into these things that he was experiencing. And
yeah.
I guess many people have had this experience, but have not been able to put it into words due to maybe shaming or just not jiving with what had related to a religious sense. But I remember him speaking about a doctor as well in the hospital had a shared death experience with one of the patients
Yeah.
and went on the journey as you're speaking. Well, was there a life review related to this at all for yourself or for the people in the company?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, not really. Um, yeah, um, the guy you're speaking about just wrote this wonderful book. In fact, it's sitting. Whoops, move my head the other way. It's right there. It's called At Heaven's Door. His name's William Peters, and he did a study of 800 people who had shared death experiences like mine,
Right, right,
and they have different components,
right.
but they are very similar to near death experiences. They're in the same genre. The after effects are the same. It's just that most of them, like me, I didn't have any physical trauma. I was just sitting on the windowsill. I was in this great grief, but other than that, there was no reason to think that I would be susceptible to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
What was your background in terms of understanding this concept besides the religious?
that's easy, like zero.
Really, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they talk about that. In my research on NDEs, that is the number one thing. If you look at the common elements that Ken Ring puts together, or Bruce Grayson, or PMH Atwater, any of them, the first thing they say is it's ineffable. It is just so hard to talk about this. So I've got a great quote for you. You ready?
Go ahead.
All right. So this is from Bruce Grayson's book. It's a guy by the name of Bill Ufer, and he's trying to describe what it's like to not have words for this experience. And he goes, quote, try to draw an odor using crayons. You can't even begin to try, no matter how many crayons you have in your box.
Yeah.
That's what it's like describing an NDE with words. No matter how many words you use, you can't really describe what an NDE is like. I love that description.
It's
Yeah.
it's interesting because as I saw the people have you spoke on different interviews. I think from my perspective, maybe you would agree or disagree. I think that the emotions become stronger and the verbalization of it becomes less, or it appears that the more over time, maybe more sentimental or more sensitivity develops from the experience or the way it's represented. Because since there are no words, there must be feelings attached to it.
Yes, there are definitely feelings, and
Maybe you could describe those feelings.
it's
Yeah.
like, um, so in my case, um, I had what was known as a clear light experience. And what that means is that as I was sitting there in the hospital room, everything around me started exuding light. And what you begin to understand is that everything is made up of the light. That I am light, in this table, this chair that I'm sitting on, it's all light.
Yeah.
And we're all made up of the same stuff. And therefore, we are all united. We're so all of us as human beings, everything that's in the physical universe, it's the shorthand is it's the unity universe, that where everything is connected to everything else. And and so that was the conditions under which I was able to connect with Mary Fran, and Nolan. Um, so, intermixed with, the feelings that the three of us had for each other, there's also the feelings of the universe as a whole. And you begin to understand that everything is made up of the light, and the light is the love. It's love is the foundation, the basic vibration of everything that that this universe is created from.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
that's only taken me about 20 years to try to figure out how to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. Yeah. It's what's interesting is that I think some people are destined to maybe have an experience where they have the opportunity then to teach and share what they've learned, to pass on the torch or the information of their experience.
Well,
You know,
what we know about shared death experiences, thank you, William Peters, is that it's the it's the person making the transition that does the request. Meaning, so there's Mary Fran and Nolan, they're in the light, and the two of them reached back, embraced me, and then pulled me through into the experience. So I didn't go into the experience, they reached back and pulled me in. And I believe it's because we had this emotional bond. And in particular, with Nolan, he never knew his biological father. And so, I'm the,
surrogate.
maybe father surrogate, whatever that is when you're dating. Um, and I think he desperately wanted it to be true. And we had a lovely relationship, although, we were kind of at the beginning. And, he reached back and said, come. Or both of them did. I can't really tell you how that works, but
Right.
um, so, at Heaven's Door talks about that some, that the primary ingredient seems to be that there has to be a loving connection, some sort of heartfelt connection with the person making the transition. And then it's that transition person that comes and pulls them forward. In a near-death experience, it's a little different. Something like 20% of the people who are close to death have a near-death experience. And why do they have that experience? There's lots of speculation about that.
Right. Right.
My favorite theory is that they needed it. There was some sort of impetus they needed, some boost.
Wake up.
It could be a wake up, or it could be just you're on the right path, and we're going to give you some extra skills, and we're going to give you some extra insight to move you more quickly down the
Right,
path.
right.
So
Or perhaps it is meant to happen in order to push the person on the right path as opposed to the wrong path. You know,
yeah, and there's plenty of
yeah, I've spoken to a
yeah,
lot of
there's
people.
some really wonderful stories about that 2x4 alongside the head, you know,
Yeah,
and
it's interesting because I do a little shamanic work and I know soul retrieval
oh
in terms of retrieving the soul. And I know from, let's say, I could speak about my experience in terms of having trauma in my childhood and having, I guess, my soul fragmented in some capacity in
yep.
different, situations. And so, I was thinking myself, I said there are people who have these NDEs, which are very traumatic, and, they're on the other spectrum of a person who loses part of their soul or becomes fragmented. And the fact is regardless, in some capacity, I think that is that when the soul escapes the body and some was released, there is that awakening, that intuitive awakening or that connection, maybe to spirit. And like for yourself, maybe you could just share with the audience like what you really gained from this rather than what you felt, what you just
Uh,
described.
um, so there was a bunch of things that I gained from it. The first thing that I didn't figure out right away, but I had this deep desire to go back because I knew that if I had been in that place once, I could do it again. And so I just searched the world over, trying to figure out a way to have something propel me back into that space where I was with Mary Fran and Nolan. And I mean, it, this makes sense after the fact, but
Right.
during the time, I just took trips, and I went to Stonehenge and the Oracle of Delphi and the Sphinx um, and the pyramids and the temples along the Nile. And I studied shamans in North and South America. I went to Japan and studied the Omoto religion. I I went to more cathedrals than you can shake a stick at, all of which I was trying to find that something that would allow me to go back there again. And so the thing that I gained was this intense um, sense of curiosity. It's like, what's this about? Is this whole world opened up for me that I had no idea existed? It certainly wasn't taught in the lexicon of the Presbyterian Church. And then it was confusing because, at the moment of my greatest grief, I am in my greatest joy. And those two emotions being intertwined, it was how do you live with that? To talk about Mary Fran and Nolan, sometimes I get choked up,
Yeah.
but it's about joy as well as grief because
Right.
it's such an incredible place. So there's that. So the gifts to me, one was curiosity. The second was intuition. Um, it had really taken a knock up, and and I wasn't really good at it at the beginning, but after a while, I'm paying attention to the things that are coming into my life. And I'm going, oh, that would be interesting. That could be on my path. This person I've met, this book I need to read.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Um, so I became um, intuitive and sensitive to energies and um, some of the other after effects that come, sensitive to medications. And
Right. Right.
um, my favorite thing, I don't know what it's good for, but when I drive my car down the highway and there's a bunch of street lights on both sides of the street, oh, I can just turn them off. Just as I'm driving down the street, they just turn off.
Is that right?
Yeah. And then they turn back on once I pass. Like,
Wow. Wow. Wow.
what's that about? It doesn't happen all the time, but enough
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you notice, and you're going, well, I guess some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's interesting because I said I find that um, most people fear death,
Yeah.
if they've never investigated, their own life and opened the door on what happens. And some people like yourself and others who have these experiences are forced into a position of dealing with a new paradigm or a new reality. But I think the positive that comes out from it is that you're proof, if you do believe in this concept, that the soul can leave, have an experience with
Hmm.
off this plane, and then return back to this plane. And then I would assume, in some capacity, that it gave you the feeling that, oh, I know where I'm going, so I might as well enjoy myself while I'm here.
Yes. And I'm glad you said it that way, Adam, because once you lose your fear of death, you also lose your fear of living. And, that sense of, wow, I can take things on, and, you know, so what if it doesn't work out? Or maybe it will, maybe it won't, but there's this, you aren't as concerned about what other people think of you. And so, um, you gain more of this confidence of yourself because you know who you are. You're a person who, um, essentially lives forever, and that, this physical shell just is really a temporary vehicle to allow us to navigate here in the physical universe. But, you know, once that's worn out or broken, we just move on.
Yes.
And, part of that curiosity was I did my doctoral work in at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, and my dissertation was about near-death experiences. And so I have now talked to hundreds and hundreds of people who've had these NDEs, and uh, they're extraordinary. The stories are extraordinary, and statistics show 1 in 20 of us has had a near-death experience. We're everywhere, and there are there's such profound insights that the stories collectively have for us, that it's really now making quite a significant contribution to Western culture in terms of how we think of death.
Yeah, yeah. I've uh, I've watched different films. I've read different books. I actually watched the movie Astral City, which was
Oh
Brazilian.
yeah.
No Solar, which was a very interesting film about the soul and the information being sent back to other relatives and what was going on in heaven. Um, Based upon your experience of what you've experienced personally, where did this lead you to professionally? Like, where did you go with it? Where you are now? Like, maybe you could describe to the audience of your work in this
Okay.
field.
So let's see. When that happened to me, I was in department store business. I was running a chain of um, 17 stores, and the recession of 1991 wasn't very kind to family-run department stores. I think 95% of them closed in 18 months.
Wow.
Um, and from then, I went to um, mentor small business owners for 20 years. And then after that, I retired, and I got a call from the Monroe Institute and said, "Don't you want to come and head up the institute?" I did. Um, Helped them through the pandemic, raised a ton of money for them, and then retired so that I could be able to do this work now.
Right, right.
Um, so that was my main gig. My side gig was, I was really determined that there had to be a way of um, introducing people to what happens in a near death experience, but without the physical trauma. Well, it turns out that meditations using binaural beat technology really work in terms of being able to set the body into, and set the non-physical body in particular into the proper vibrational state. So if you're interested, say, in having a life review, well, that exists at a certain vibratory state. And, binaural beats can help you get there. And then, with a little guidance, you can have that. You want to explore the tunnel. You want to meet with your dead relatives. You want to have that experience of, where do we hang out in that life between lives? Well, there's a vibration for it.
Right.
And, the people who study near death experiences call that area the park. And, it's just filled with things. It's where the Akashic records are. That's where the healing and regeneration centers are. That's where the universities are. It's anyway, the point is, that's what professionally my side profession was, trying to figure out a way to make that happen so that people who are afraid of death or are just curious about what happens to themselves as they make their transition or what happened to a loved one, they
Yes.
take
Yes.
the course. We make the transition about 25 times. And at the end of it, they go, I know exactly what's going to happen. I know who's going to come pick me up. I know what we're going to do when we investigate the tunnel. I've set up a party in the light for the reunion with the dead relatives. And I've, got a list of folks I want to catch up with. And, once
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
plan it
Yeah.
out, it's like, yeah, it's something to look forward to, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah. What's the biggest detriment to a person's ability to do this type of work?
The biggest detriment. um,
Well, actually, I should say the biggest blockade that gets in the way of somebody being able to want to do this, but then
oh, thank
that's
you.
I had to
I
clarify
get
that.
where you're going now.
Yes.
Well, there's a couple. One is self-doubt. I just don't know if I can do that. I never had enough really good at being a meditator. Blah, 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 blah,
Right. 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 Right.
right. And you just go, and that's something that they have to, that's an internal thing. And once they get the confidence, if they just, once you try binaural beat meditations,
Right.
they are
Right.
so good at putting you into these states of expanded awareness. You get the hang of it really quickly. The other thing would be culturally. If somebody's grown up in a religious tradition that doesn't believe in this, or say they're an atheist, like I
Right.
just,
Right.
when it's over, lights out, blackness, done, dust, we are dust. Um, and, so, you know, why would an atheist take my class? I don't get that. But those folks that are curious and want to do this work, they certainly can have that advantage and be able to go there ahead of time.
Yeah. I do Akashic record readings myself, and
Oh,
from my perspective, doing the readings and doing a reading for myself is a little bit different because than it is for
yeah,
someone else, because my ego does get in the way of blocking information that I do or don't want to hear. And so I thought the ego,
really.
yeah,
I
yeah,
can't imagine that
yeah,
happening.
yeah, absolutely, that's right. And I know through the binaural beats, and as you mentioned just a second ago, most of the people who've had a near death experience, such as Eben Alexander, and I've interviewed a woman by the name of Mary Jane Hensley, Dr. Mary Jane Hensley. She also
Yep.
is able to then hear frequency, disease through frequency. And as you speak yourself, these developing sounds or frequencies, binaural beats, to to open up the, I guess, to push aside the ego and allow the subconscious or connection, that mindfulness part of us to
Yeah.
grow.
People who are trained in that kind of meditation, um, there's a couple of really easy tricks you can do to kind of shut down that um, self-doubt or that mind chatter that
But such
that
as
happened.
so,
Um, well, one of the things that's taught at the Monroe Institute is a thing they call the energy conversion box. And it's a mental box. In my head, it's like a immigrant's chest. You get that pictured, at the top, the heavy
yes,
lid.
yes, yes, yes.
And then in it, I put things like all those problems related to work. I just take my briefcase and put it into that immigrant's box. And I'm worried about my mother's health. And so I pick a symbol for her. I grew up in the 50s. So, it's that apron that all women wore then, and I put that in the box. And, my car's been on the fritz lately. So I take a model of my car and I throw it in the box, and you dump the things that are most concerning you and you close the heavy lid and you go, okay, if I ever need to go back and, visit what's going on at work, it's right there in the box. So it's fine. Just sit there. And that frees up your mind, because your mind says, oh, yeah, all those concerns that we have, they're safely set to the side here. That's good. And we'll just go do this other thing now. All those worries are safe. We got them captured.
So all the defense mechanisms we can always use them again when we need them. I guess.
Yeah, if you want to go back and worry about that report you need to write, you can open up the box and pull out that worry and chew on it for a while. But you don't have to.
What's the most? I would say the interesting. I asked you already what you've learned from it, but what would you say the most profound part of the experience was that you was so touched by?
I was able to reestablish a relationship with Mary Fran and Nolan, and they were the first ones that I reached out for. And in the intervening years, Mary Fran has been kind of in and out of my life. Nolan has always been there. He's like right there. He's like right over my shoulder. He's just a part of my life. And we get to have conversations. I get to guide him. He guides me. And then of course that led to, well, can I talk to my Grandpa Brett and my Grandma Jenny, and I had two really good friends die in high school, and what's going on with those two? Chuck, George, what's happening? And that connection with those that have left the physical plane is there. You can call on it, and it brings me great comfort, knowing that it's available. And at the most profound level, it is a confirmation of life after death.
Yeah.
That the physical body, when we lose that, we are in this amazing, extraordinary place filled with people who love us, and that we get a chance to go and explore and do all other kinds of fun stuff. So, what do you want to do next? You want to come back to Earth next? You want to go someplace in the Pleiades and hang out at another planet? You want to switch universes and go to someplace you've never been before? We get to choose. So it's exciting to think about what is available to us once we leave our physical bodies. Does that mean that I'm interested in leaving it early? No. And really, Adam, every person that has tried to commit suicide that I've interviewed that had a near-death experience, they will tell you the same thing. Just to a person, they'll say, when the time comes, I'm ready to go. But until then, I really want to be here on Earth, because this is an extraordinary gift, this life here in the physical, and to take advantage of all of the richness of the lessons and the people, the interactions that happen between us and the physical world, just not available.
It's almost a privilege to have.
It is a real privilege to be here in the physical. And when the time comes, see ya.
Yeah,
but I'm on my way.
Yeah,
with a big grin on my face.
But the real privilege is the fact that you're able to experience that, to have had that experience, and then come back and then to speak about it.
Which makes one of the things we do in our class is that we help another make their transition.
Right.
And because sometimes people get a little stuck their vibratory level is low because they've been sick for so long. Anyway,
Yeah.
and we can come in, and because we are in our non-physical bodies are so close, our vibrations are closer to the physical world, we can add energy to them to help them, boost them on, and give them guidance about where to go. We can take them to the light. All of us have done it hundreds of times. So I think the funniest ones though are the ones that kind of wake up and you go, hey, you're dead. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And they look at you and go, yeah, boom. And they just take off. They just like, I'm so out of here.
Wow, wow, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's, there's this great joy upon release that, that happens.
Yeah,
And, in particular, you see it a lot around folks that have been ill for a long time and their physical body is just, they've been in pain for a long time. So the fact of losing that pain and feeling good, and there's great grandma Jenny standing right there. Let's go talk to her. It's, yeah,
yeah, but
it's lovely.
but yet there are souls that have not fulfilled their mission here and
Yep.
were left, or had an experience where they still stay around rather than take off on that explosion to see their relatives and to find peace. Is that because of their prior knowledge of heaven or their inability to know where to go?
Um,
Did,
the ones, well, you've done soul retrieval. So the ones that I have worked with, either they're just flat out confused, like, I don't know where I am. I'm disoriented. So there's that kind, and that's easy to fix. And there's those who have a real lingering attachment to either a place or a person. So you'll see that with young mothers, for instance. They'll, be hanging around their child and watching their child grow up. And they think they can do it by being close to uh, the physical world and not going to the light. What they don't know is that it's easy on the other side. Once you're in the light, to look back and help out. People that are in the physical world, they just don't know.
yeah,
And then there's those who, happens on battlefields all the time, or like at 9/11, where there's
trauma.
1 second you're at your desk and you're working, and the next second you're dead, and there's no notice, um, no forewarning. It just was a sudden death, and it takes a while for the soul to realize that that something has changed, and they
Right,
could
right.
still be in that era of being confused. And like, sometimes you really have to tell them, because they could be sitting at their desk still writing that Monday morning report in the non-physical.
Yeah, my grandfather was a Russian soldier during World War II. My father's biological father. He didn't know
Yeah.
him. He knew of his photo and knew stories about him, and then I wound up finding him in Russia in the battlefield in about 11 years ago. But what was gnawing at me was, I guess, his energy of being forgotten from the family.
Ah.
And I had a divorce, and my two children, in some capacity, were maybe headed in that direction of not being included in that family story. And it was my feeling to bring him back, but I felt, I guess, maybe his presence was gnawing around myself or the family of being wanting to be recognized. So I think that, as you said, that war shock of losing your physical body to, and not being, not really wanting to surrender it so quickly, as opposed to somebody who's suffering in pain and say, I want to just release this pain and leave my body behind and just be free.
Yeah.
Probably a
there
different.
there's all kinds of really interesting work done in soul retrieval, and people who have the ability to see the connection between those in the physical and those in the non-physical, and that that thoughts and prayers and intentions, are real things. And at least those that I've talked to have described it like this light beam that goes from the person in the physical when they're doing, some sort of intention for a dead relative,
Right, right.
and from the heart to that person, to their heart, and yeah, so it being remembered would be really helpful that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
I can, and congratulations for doing the work on your, was it your father, your grandfather?
My grandfather, my grandfather,
Grandfather.
my father's father. My father didn't want to talk about it, and so he dismissed it. But there were things happening around him, like I made a documentary film about this story.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what happened was is that my father heard my voice in his television. I wasn't there, but I assume my grandfather and my mother called me up and said, "Adam, I heard your voice in the television." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Yes, there was like a part playing with the TV off with your voice."
Nice
So,
work.
well, I guess it's similar to the lights flashing on and off when you're driving by on the highway.
Yeah,
Um,
you just wish where you knew what the on-off switch was.
that's true. That's true.
How did I do that?
Yeah. Um, so, for example, if somebody were to have this experience, I guess in some capacity there's a mediumship component as well involved, as opposed,
Mhm.
it wouldn't be just the person who you've had that one experience with, but you'd have the capacity probably to connect when in the company of someone else's energy, or maybe
Mm.
no, maybe that's not right.
No, mediumship is a thing and
Okay.
really helpful. Um, what I believe is that we all can develop that capacity for ourselves. We don't need another to help us out.
Right, right. I got that.
And so, we do the meditative techniques that allow us to do that. At the beginning, it's easier to work with um, those folks where we have a heart connection,
Okay.
because it's easier to call
Right,
them
right,
in.
right.
But I've got this buddy Dick who has been doing this work for a long time, and he's developed this ability to um, be able to find anybody he wants to talk to. And he happens to be fascinated with composers, and so last week he was talking to Sibelius, and the week before that it was J.S. Bach and Tchaikovsky, and
Wow, 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 wow.
and it was that's his thing. He wanted to dial in and ask them some questions about their music and how that music has affected music today, and he's just fascinated by that whole realm.
Yeah.
And but he can dial in anybody he wants. Got a buddy of mine who dials into Hemingway all the time. So it's like, who do you want to talk to?
Yeah, yeah. How do you,
So
so how does someone, what class do you recommend someone take through the Monroe Institute, and what exactly would they do, or what does it encompass?
um So if they're just interested in developing their talents at Monroe, it's the Gateway Voyage. That's the first class everybody takes. Take it. It's fabulous. It will set you off on your path. If you're interested in doing what we've been talking about in the near death realm, so exploring the tunnel and the life review and light beings and Akashic records, that sort of thing, there's a class that I teach that's called Near Death Experience Intensive. It's a 5.5 day course, and you can find it really easily on neardeathmeditations.com. So that's my website, neardeathmeditations.com.
Okay.
And and along with that, um, there's a whole series of albums that I've done, guided meditations that we use in the class, and you can use on your own ahead of time just to kind of warm up. They're right behind my head here. That's what they look like. So when you're on the website, you can go, oh yeah, there we go,
Right.
and pick one that kind of tickles your fancy. That's always the best place to start. If you're like, oh, I'd love to meet my guides. Well, do that one.
Right, right, right.
And it's $20. I mean, it's hardly anything. And if you're interested in this kind of work, I've recently become a podcaster. Thank you for your leadership in that area, Adam.
Yeah.
And it's called The Afterlife Files. And you can find that in all of the wherever you get your podcasts.
Right, right, right.
So thank you for allowing me to do that little commercial. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's inspiring information and inspiring work. So in order to enhance the consciousness of people watching and passing the word on, I think it's excellent, an excellent idea. Is there anything that you'd like to speak about or leave us with in terms of any type of information?
Yeah, there's this thought I've been having lately that this kind of work that we're doing in the near-death experience realm is really important. And I mean critically important. I mentioned before that I think that it has made a real difference in Western culture in terms of how we view death. Excuse me, here I got a prop. There we go. Got my prop handy. So as little as 10 years ago, whenever we talked about death, what would happen is that in printed form, this guy would show up.
Just move it over a little bit. There you go. Yeah, the Grand Reaper.
The Grim Reaper.
Grim
yes.
Reaper, yeah.
You know, and you look at this and you go, oh my gosh, you know, it's a dark figure. It's solitary. It's scary. It's capricious. You know, a sigh when it goes through the field just cuts, you know, whatever's in front of it. It's malevolent. It's, you know, it's a dark thing to think that this was the image of death as little as 10 years ago. But that has been profoundly changed. You hardly ever see the Grim Reaper anymore. It's been replaced by this.
I use light. That. Interesting.
This is the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, yes.
And when you think of how often you now see near-death experiences, I mean, let's face it, Harry Potter had one in his last film. Homer Simpson has had one. Virtually every soap opera on the planet has had a near-death experience. So that has just become part of our culture. And, you know, this image is about moving from the
just
denseness.
Move it over. Yeah, there you go. That's good.
There we go. It's about moving through the denseness of life into the light. Yes. And what's the light represent? It represents love. It represents those people there who we are that are waiting for us. I mean, it's my grandmother, it's my grandfather, it's my loved ones, it's my friends. You know, they're all there waiting for me. So it has this entirely different feel when people start talking about death and they put this image out there of the light at the end of the tunnel. It's like just the whole fear factor just goes down many, many notches. So my hat's off to IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. They have a wonderful website. The University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies has done, in particular, Dr. Bruce Grayson, who headed that up forever.
Right.
He, you know, those institutions are largely responsible for us changing how we think about death. And now that we are in this process of this grand transformation into hopefulness, we all get to live a different life.
Yeah.
We get to be unafraid about living in the physical world. So, you know, my hat's off to them. My hat's off to you and your listeners, because, you know, we're now embracing this idea that we never die. And there's a ton of science behind it now. It's a real thing. We can let go of all the skeptics and begin to say, I love life.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's go do this thing.
And the next time we pick the tarot card, the death card, we can look at it as a rebirth as opposed to
Yes, as
just
a
a death.
rebirth.
And
Especially, and it's wonderful because something ends that was grim, you know, and malevolent.
well,
And we get to,
yeah, we're
well,
in
we
that.
get to,
Yeah, God, I'm
we get to
sorry.
we get to move on and do
Yeah.
something more fun. Thank goodness for that card.
Well, we're in that phase now of our humanity, a kind of death rebirth process as we enter into this new paradigm coming in, and having people like yourself share your own personal experiences to have the inner strength to uh, share a part of yourself that is very intimate, but yet so educational and informing is a very inspiring moment and a very inspiring experience for yourself, but more so for the people who are interested in this information. So I'd like to thank you for joining me and sharing this with everyone.
I appreciate the time, and Adam, I enjoyed this. This was wonderful, and
Yeah,
thank you all of you out there. And one last time, don't forget to go to neardeathmeditations.com.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'll put all that information down anyhow. I'll put it at the end of the website, which is perfect. Yeah, I'm very interested in the subject, as you know, as we spoke, and I thank you very much for sharing the time. And I'm going to look into the classes. I'd like to do that maybe.
Yeah, wonderful. Well,
All
thank
right.
you, Adam, for
Yep.
inviting me. This has been a hoot.
Yes, it's been very nice. Enjoy the rest of the year and be strong and healthy.
I will, and you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.